To this month's session for TFGON. My name's Thad Bibb. I'm transitioning from Marty's been leading this part of the organization for a while, and I just came onto the board, and this was my assigned duty. I was happy to do it. We've got a number of great speakers lined up, and some good interaction. I'd like to introduce tonight Jason Anderson. Jason's the founder and CEO of PreVeteran. It's a neuroscience-based training that helps veterans succeed in the private sector environment, and we're just very excited to have him. And not only is he presenting tonight, but he's offered some free slots into his course. We've already had a number of TFGON members sign up, so we're very excited about that opportunity. We do have a couple more empty slots, so those that are watching, that if you're interested and would like to try it, then we have Jason on. So with that, we'll save plenty of time for some question and answer. But Jason, if you'd like to get started, welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight.
You bet. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the TFGON team letting me kind of do this presentation tonight. I will go through some slides. I'll keep it at a nice high level, but what we're really here to do is just kind of explain things through potentially a different lens you hadn't heard before, with how PreVeteran kind of sees the military transition problem. This is intended to be very interactive. So if you have questions as we go through this material, because like I said, we kind of look at things differently, please go ahead and just ask. I really do appreciate the opportunity. So I'm going to get started. Just for the agenda tonight, I know I was given like a 30 to 45 minute kind of slot here. I'm going to keep it within that. But what we're going to do is kind of let you know a little bit more about me, the foundational transition problem as we see it. And then we'll talk about what our product is, which is actually what we call PreVeteran Core. It's a systemic or a system solution. And then we'll talk about the actual PreVeteran employment prep course, which is that cohort you mentioned that we've done for going into our 6th year now, held 3 times a year, virtually 5-week courses that are cohort based. All right. Here's Jason in a nutshell here. Okay, so my military background. I'm going to tell you about my military background, and I'm going to tell you about my private sector background as well. So I'm a 95 Air Force Academy grad. As you can kind of see here, I was a HERC guy. That's why I know Marshall here in the group. So we got a little bit of that background together. You can see here, just with my timing, I ended up doing a lot of wartime flying, got my wings in 97, went right to Ramstein, went right into Bosnia, and then right after that, headed to Little Rock right before September 11th. So got to do the Afghanistan thing and then the Iraq thing. After that, my career took a huge turn because I was like, holy smokes, I've been a wartime guy, 3 wars in 5 years. I got to see if I could find something a little bit different. So what I did is found something very different. I became an exchange pilot to the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force. I was actually in a Japanese squadron physically for 5 years. I have a very bizarre career. And then what does a guy do when literally no one on earth knows who you are except for a GS-11 that's in Honolulu? Well, you start cold calling people. Cold called PACOM, PACAF, and the Pentagon. I did not want to leave one island and move to another, so it was going to be DC. And that's, of course, where I did a 6-year stint at the Pentagon. I loved it. I was with Heidi Grant at SAF-IA, selling a bunch of defense hardware and equipment to Japan. It was a phenomenal use of what I had learned in the military. Following that, not surprisingly, after spending 6 years at the Pentagon selling defense and hardware equipment, Rockwell Collins was one of my customers that would come in and talk to me all the time while I was the country director for Japan. So what we did is we decided in my retirement in 2014 was to move back to Wyoming, my home of record and my hometown. And what I did is through friends ended up getting an entry-level business development job. Within a year, I'm actually promoted to the head of business for Japan, Korea, Taiwan. So I moved from entry-level to executive. We were expatriated, the family, to Tokyo, where we spent almost 4 years. And then I spent another 4-ish years as a senior individual contributor in the strategy role. Altogether, I spent 9 years in industry. So the kind of point behind this is I definitely have, much like everybody here, I have the military chops. but certainly I've 9 years of private sector experience ranging from entry level to executive across the business, which was fascinating because that's where I got to meet with Kelly Ortberg, who's now the CEO of Boeing. He was one of my mentors. I got to see across all lines of business, know all the product lines, all the leaders, sat in on all the talent boards and stuff like that. And that's when I found out, believe it or not, I didn't know a darn thing about the private sector when I left the military and entered the private sector. That was the big takeaway. And that's how PreVeteran got started. Is I was pretty overwhelmed with trying to figure out the private sector environment. I did not understand it at all. And man, was I really pedaling underwater, not visible to those, where I was struggling trying to figure out that new workplace environment. And that will be a theme you'll hear in here. Okay, so what is the problem? And when I say the problem, I think after we started our research in transition when I was expatriated with my family to Tokyo in 2016, we ended up, this is what we've stumbled upon in our pre-program kind of design of the research space here. This is the core problem, believe it or not. So when someone created the transition assistance program back in, and it was deployed back in 91, the way we view it is someone conflated the environments of the military environment and the private sector environment. I'll get to more explanation on this, but over the last 30 years, this is what we think has taken place. And once the government and the TAP program kind of create this environment with these assumptions, it creates a market. So what you're looking at here on this slide is like this encapsulation of what has happened. And now I'll show you what happens downstream from that. So again, somebody said the military and the private sector are substantially similar. Government created a program called TAP. And then if a market is set by such an enormous influential organizations or set of organizations, naturally researchers then get into that market, start investigating that market. Higher education gets into that market, starts looking at the market, and then employers are now in this market, and they go within the confines of how it was framed, and they say, okay, how do we operate within this environment? Okay. Now, you got to think about the downstream consequences to individual service members once the environment is set that these environments are conflated. Let me know if any of you have heard these messages at all. You are highly skilled and capable. Companies are waiting to hire you. You're going to make six figures, and then you're going to fit. You're going to be a plug and play into any organization. Just curious if any listening in have heard those messages before. Okay. Thad's like, yes. I most definitely heard this in 2012, 2013, 2014. Hey, you're a Pentagon guy. You're going to be great. You're an academy grad. You know, you're going to fit right in. And so this becomes confusing. Now, I want you to kind of think of, again, the setup here is going back to this. So the environment, someone back in the day said these environments are similar, which then makes sense for why you hear these messages, because what else are they going to tell you? They're going to say you're going to fit right in, you're plug and play into organizations. So unfortunately, this kind of weighs on the service member's mind. And on any given day, and feel free to share what you're comfortable with sharing. I remember my 2 years prior up till my departure, there were wide swings of huge ups and downs where on any given minute, I was like, man, this is going to be a piece of cake, to the next minute, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And you kind of go on this roller coaster of emotions because people are telling you you're great, you're going to fit right in, you're going to make all this money, it's going to be a piece of cake, but you're waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning because your brain's like, how the hell are you going to do this? And this becomes honestly the genesis of many of the downstream problems that maybe we hadn't thought about before, and something we're bringing to the forefront with PreVeteran. So let me explain. So as you talk about the active component here and the transition with the magenta here, and then as you head into these environments, the service member becomes the common denominator for all these experiences. So my point is, just because you're confused as you're leaving the military and aren't quite sure how to put things together, that confusion doesn't go away. That confusion persists. So it's going to play out in the workplace. This is beyond the scope of this briefing, but I can tell you in Rockwell Collins and I was successful, quote unquote, making good money in a great company with a great culture, I had no idea what I was doing in those roles. No idea. I remember telling my wife in an entry level BD role, which I was supposed to plug into, by the way. And by the way, the company thinks you can plug in there too. I remember telling my wife 6 to 8 months in, I'm like, honey, I wasn't laughing at the time, by the way. I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing in this role. Like, no idea. I'm going through the motions. I know that I need to submit a report every couple weeks. I don't know why. I'll ask the boss. She's going to tell me this. And I'm like, what is this environment? So this is kind of confirmation that there are hugely different. Um, these environments are drastically, drastically different from one another. Here, I'll kind of pause here for a second. That's like quite a lot of information. Are there any questions or comments on kind of the initial analysis?
Hey, Jason, it's Jim Kepper. Just wondering, how's your proficiency in the Japanese language?
Mada
Must be
pera
pretty
pera
good.
perio. I'm still proficient. It was we moved there when I was 30 and we were newlyweds, which I, by the way, don't recommend you compete against your wife in a language school. Just like it's a bad idea, kind of out of the gate. But I'm still pretty darn proficient. It was a wonderful experience. I appreciate the Air Force for doing that for me, but and stayed connected with Japan, by the way, for the next 20 years.
Yeah, that's I'm a Intel guy, so when we send troops to Japanese language school, it's like a 2-year school. It's one of the toughest languages to learn. So you being able to speak Japanese, that's like awesome.
Man, it came with some deep scars, like really deep scars. Especially at age 30, my brain is way too slow at that point. You know what I mean? So, woof. Any other?
Congratulations.
Thank you. Any other questions at this point?
Jason, I really think your briefing so far rings true with me, and and I was amazed at how many friends and even just kind of loose associates as you're making, having your 1,000 cups of tea, in your transition and talking to friends and trying to figure out what you want to do, and how many people shared with me just the personal stress that they went through in their transition, right, and how that impacted their home life and their work life and their, I had one friend that's like, and he's done really well. He's working for a prime, making big dollars and doing great, but he said in that transition, as he was trying to figure that out, and even as he got there, he said, I was physically sick. I said, I was, it was, and so a lot of times I think, general officers, flag officers, we don't always share that side of things. And so, luckily I had friends that did share that, but no, this really rings true. So, I'm curious, and maybe you'll get to this, Jason, but kind of what is this based on your personal experience, or is this based on research you've done, or kind of what's the background that what's the foundation that you built this on?
It's great. It definitely was. It germinated out of personal experience, kind of like to your point in the conversation you've had with others. What ends up happening, and the brain science is definitely built into the course, but if there's a problem you don't know how to overcome, your brain's going to try to overcome it and it's going to try to boil the ocean. I can't even imagine at the general officer level and all the other stuff you have to do on top of that, right? You got to take care of your people, you got to take care of your family, you got to take care of the unit and stuff like that. But your brain is doing amazing cognitive load trying to figure out how to fix this problem, but there's no way to channel, there's no model to channel this energy into. So it becomes stress, exhaustion, just like you had told me about with your friend, where it's going to create discord with your family. It created discord with my wife for sure. She's like, what the hell are you doing? I mean, I was just, I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to do this. And you're, as being a top performer, you just want, your brain is telling you this. So you don't know, it becomes this really interesting problem of like, I got to do this. And if somebody asks you the question, do you really need to do that? You don't know how to answer it, which just kind of points to the confusion that goes on within the individual service member's mind. It's fascinating. So I'm telling you the problem here. Don't worry, I have the solution. So don't. We're not going to dwell on the problem too long here. I do want to show one more thing for you, Thad. Now that you bring it up, something that's really starting to hit home with the commanders we're talking to now, unit readiness. Now, I want to be very, very clear about this right here. No one has studied this, and we are going to start studying this. So when you talk about transition, like we chose an 18-month period, and to walk you through the chart here, this is kind of like the time before your transition, 18 months out, 15 months out, 12, 10, 7, so on, so forth. The readiness effective loss that you have, and this is per individual, is significant, meaning at any one time, if you just run the numbers, 20% of any unit is getting ready to get out. Okay. We just talked about the cognitive load that they have. And if they don't have a way to channel this into an effective program, they're going to be stressing themselves out individually, which is a mental health problem, stressing their family relationships out with their spouse or significant other. And then they're not going to be able to show up to work and actually be effective, is our contention. Now, we're going to go study that. We have a PhD at Texas A&M who's done a bunch of research with us on our cohorts, and we're going to start studying this because we think it is a huge hidden problem within kind of the ranks right now. Okay, here we go. All right, so let's get to the solution, shall we? So we just kind of painted the problem. We're saying that this is a known problem intuitively. Everyone feels it, but everybody just kind of goes, this is the way it's been for 30 years. There's nothing we can do to change it. We think that that is completely wrong. And we're ready to kind of take this at a much higher level and scale this problem, or the solution, actually. So believe it or not, the problem's actually very easy to solve. Very easy to solve. It's just, it requires us to address it completely differently. So the challenge and the solution. The challenge is no one's come out and told you, even though your brain might have told you this, the military and the private sector environments are totally different environments. Completely different environments. Now, when we talk about the training within the course, we use three different things. We use existence, competition, and the need to make revenue to point to why they're different. Okay. Existence. The military is mandated to exist per the Constitution. So it'll be here into perpetuity so long as there is a need for defense. Private sector is already on the other end of the spectrum, where there's existential threats every day, purposefully designed within the market, right? So we're already talking about totally different environments with the first analysis. The second is competition. I'm not sure which services we have in the call here. I'm Air Force. I never had an Air Force B team or C team member that's trying to unseat me. So you don't have that friction that you have in business all the time with competitors that are nipping at your heels. So you're unfamiliar with that. And then finally, the need to make revenue. The military is a cost center. It spends money. Yes, that can pose challenges. However, it pales in comparison to the private sector, where you have to make money before you could spend it, or borrow money before you could spend it. My point here is that the decision-making, the thinking and decision-making that you developed in the military is completely different in the private sector. And more importantly, the people that you're going to interact, work with, work alongside in the organization of, their thinking and decision-making apparatus is completely different than yours. So I'll pause here for a second and just kind of get some thoughts on that. Or I can move on.
I think you're spot on,
This
Jason.
is Jim again. I couldn't agree with you more. I went from military to Lockheed with a LLC in the middle, and what a difference! What a difference! In the military, you're thinking about doing whatever needs to be done to get the mission done, and on the private sector side, you know, it's the growth, it's the revenue that drives a lot of the decision making within that environment. And to make the switch is tough for a lot of people. I agree with you completely.
Hey, Jim, that was one thing I was going to ask the group. So I'm a relatively young guy. I retired in 24. And so, LLC for just a little bit, and now 6 months into my first time job. And so this all rings very true to me. For the guys that have been around a little longer, did you see this in your second and third transitions also, or not as much because you knew more and had more skills in your basket, or was it more stressful for some of the later transitions? Jim, would you or anybody else like to share?
I'll take a quick shot. So for me, you run past the finish line when you're on active duty. So I did, all I saw when I retired was less like big black wall in front of me with not knowing what's on the other side. So I stood up an LLC and went out and talked to tons of people. People will talk to you. I reached out on LinkedIn to people I didn't even know and say, hey, can I get a cup of coffee with you and learn about your business and see what's important to you and see what's going on? I never received a no. And that's how I got into Lockheed Martin. I was trying to get them as a client, and they said, "Hey, we got a job for you that we think you might be able to fill." And so I went with that. But yeah, when you're on active duty, if you run past the finish line, to me it was a big black wall. And so to kind of get over the transom, I did the LLC, which was like being a second lieutenant again, because you're learning everything from talking to small companies to large companies to the companies in between. And then as the word gets out you're available, then other companies will come search for you. But they don't come search for you at the beginning for the most part, at least in my experience. Over.
Let me ask Jim a real quick question though, because perfect point. My experience very similar to that. The thing is, even though intuitively you're like, I need to talk people. First, do you know how to do that? Second, do you know which questions to ask? Third, right? So there. My point is, there's a contextual piece that's missing completely from the conversation. And it's because it's not framed properly, meaning no one's told you, or broader, the entire military population at large, that you're moving from one environment to another, and that's going to require training. Like, this should be beyond obvious to the government at large, but it is not. Their program conflates the environments. We don't think but once a program is gone and set, it kind of tends to stay in perpetuity and doesn't change much. We're taking a completely different approach. What we want to do is explain to you and everyone else the military is very different than the private sector, and there's going to be some training required to get you from one to the other. And there's a lot of depth to that, but get you oriented in this environment and then beginning to understand the thinking and decision making that needs to take place in that environment, because service members, incredibly smart, incredibly adaptive. If you give them the template to adapt to and understand the thinking and decision making paradigms, unstoppable, truly, and unstoppable at scale, which is even more fascinating. So let's talk about what we do specifically. So this is PreVeteran Core. This is our product, if you will, that kind of goes through all of our products that we've got out there. So the whole thing is installing a new operating system for unit readiness success, right? So the framework we talk about is what I was just explaining to you, right? A very simple concept. You were intentionally trained in the military. The private sector is very different. You need training. I'll tell you what, literally, and feel free to give me feedback on this, I can convert a service member's mind in about 45 seconds by literally just saying that, right? It makes sense to them. They're like, that totally makes sense. What do you want me to do now, right? So the framework is really important. The next piece of that that's within core is the mindset awareness and self-regulation, right? So we'll talk more about that downstream just a little bit, but because the military requires different thinking and decision making, you need to be aware of how those messages can be carried over into the private sector and how that is not necessarily helpful. Private sector orientation. Once you understand how a company is organized, how it makes money, and how your role fits into the profit-making enterprise, your uptake to becoming extremely proficient and get hired more quickly goes way down, as does your stress. And then career exploration. This is a huge part of our program. Service members, understandably, like I think it was brought up here a moment ago, we accomplish the mission. At the root of what we are is a generalist. Unfortunately, there are no generalists in the private sector, unless you're in a startup or a small business where you wear multiple hats. The normal private sector, you are very siloed in what you do. That is the only way small, medium, and large size companies organize. That's the way they have to organize, because could you imagine having a ensemble of generalists in the private sector? No one would have sufficient depth to understand the role of what they need to do. So the organizations are absolutely, completely 180 out from one another again. So, but once you know that, You can go explore careers in the sector that you're interested in and the role that you're interested in, and do what Jim just did. And we'll show you how we do that, where you do these iterative methods where you go talk to people, because once you start developing long-term memory in this private sector environment before you ever even get out, there is no transition anymore. It's pretty seamless. Okay, so this is our model. So I'm going to invoke my daughter's name here. So my daughter is Sienna. She is a second year at GCU, so Grand Canyon University. What we did with her, her junior year rather, is we had her create a parallel life, and this is what we want to do with service members moving forward. 18 months to 3 years, and this is again a pre-veteran model. This is very different than what happens now. 18 months to 3 years before someone leaves the service. And that is not a hard number, by the way. We understand we get people way less than that. Totally get it. We even get veterans in the program. I'm just saying, ideally 18 months to 3 years. And what we have you do is carry on with your military life, knowing that your private professional development is being handled by PreVeteran through our core training system. So you can imagine, as you do this parallel track and you put effort and energy into doing these, you can do both in parallel, and everybody wins. The unit wins, you win, and the employer will win, because you found the right industry, company, and role that you need to go into. So this is kind of the win-win we're looking for. This is aspirational right now. We're doing this at a small scale, but this is how we kind of see turning the entire transition system into something way more functional. Here is the deployment of that program, where this is kind of more like kind of mental framework of bifurcating your last 3 years of your career. Here's how we literally do it. So in that last 18 months to 3 years, we have a virtual cohort. This is what Thad and Marty were talking about. We've held this cohort 3 times a year since 2020. We've had about 500 people go through the program. Our cohort sizes now are about 40 to 50 people, and we could that's going to continue to grow over time. It is 99% virtual, 5 weeks long. What's great about it is the way the students report this is that you put in about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour and a half per week. That's it. So it fits into the busiest of schedules, because you go through the videos and go through the exercises we have you do. And then once you finish the course, you actually go into our pre-veteran alumni community. So let me show you what that looks like. This is literally, look at that handsome guy. This is our LMS. So our LMS, you would start 2 weeks prior to this just to make sure you got the right technology set up and stuff like that. But you could see weeks 1 through 5. I'll go through what each of those weeks are just here in a moment, so you can kind of see what you're doing. But they address every single thing we talked about in core, and every one of the gaps you have right now leaving the military, trying to move from one environment to the other. So week 1, tech ready. Week 2, the mindset, awareness and thinking and decision. Week 3, understanding the private sector. And then week 4 and 5 is a capstone, where you go start exploring careers with our methodology, so you could go begin narrowing down industry, company, role, and level. And then you flow into this community. In this community, it's a virtual community where we cover a bunch of additional stuff beyond that. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the community, but there's a career accelerator piece, which helps keep you honest and accountable for your career search. And then there's a life optimization piece, where we talk about your VA claim toolkit, life insurance, financial, health and wellness, stuff like that. So what we need you to do is be persistent in your efforts. And that doesn't mean you do hours and hours per week. It just means once you're developing this new muscle group you need to be successful, it's like building muscle. You've got it already. Now you maintain it until you are successful once you leave the military. Okay, here we go. So week 1, right? So week 1 in the course is, again, we will bring up this visual a lot, right? You are leaving one environment and moving to the other. So one thing you have to do is communicate effectively, right? So in communicating effectively, just like Jim had mentioned, right? What we do is we have you build a tech stack, right? And that's like a fancy buzzword these days, but the tech stack consists of a Google Workplace account. Let me go back. When we talk about moving from one environment to another, you need to be able to communicate with that environment first and foremost, recognizing it's a new environment. The way you do that is with the tech stack. So I'll kind of build this out here. We teach you through tutorials how to integrate these things together, because guess what? No one in the private sector must talk to you. There's no requirement for anyone to talk to you, even though Jim agrees that they will talk to you. But the key is you got to come across succinctly, professionally, and be able to set up a meeting seamlessly. So this tech stack allows you to set up a 30, and all this is free, by the way. It's a free setup where, with Zoom, you can do a free 40-minute meeting. Calendly allows you to align calendars effortlessly, because Jim will tell you, if you get somebody on LinkedIn, you go, hey, John, I'm only available next Tuesday and Thursday. Well, I'm Monday, 8 to 10, and you're Friday. And you're just like, oh my God, I don't have time for this. So what this does is it sends, once you've integrated these things together, it sends a link so the person can look at your calendar and then schedule a meeting. It takes 2 minutes. Such a phenomenal tool. And then, of course, LinkedIn, because everybody uses it, and that's where the professionals are out there. And then we've incorporated AI tools. So when we talk about AI tools,
if I could jump in there, Jason,
please.
that is what you just made. The point you just made is really important. So a lot of people on this session here have had execs and secretaries and all the support staff to make all those things happen. As soon as you step out, you lose all that. And so when I did the LLC, I had to do all that myself. And oh my gosh, that was probably the hardest part of standing up an LLC that I had to do. But when you get competent in that, that's really important as you deal with the other companies that you're trying to get into or deal with, that you're able to deal with all these different software packages that are out there that everybody uses, unless you hire somebody to do that for you. So really important point there, Jason.
Thank you. Yeah, and it works great, and people love it, because instantly when you get the tools to talk to people, you just feel more comfortable, and you're like, and then you're kind of willing to take that step of going to talking to people. But we love giving you a small task, giving you the tools, and then go use them, right? And then as soon as you start using them, you get comfortable. Once you get comfortable, you start getting competent. Once you start getting competent, you start really feeling more comfortable in this ambiguous environment, and all goodness comes from that. So exciting. Okay, so that's week one. There's more in week one, but that's the highlight. Week two of the course, again, 2 different environments. You're moving from one environment to the other. We will talk about it a lot because it's important to frame it that way. Thinking and decision making. When we talk about thinking and decision making, this is a basic linkage of cognitive neuroscience, where we talk about the thoughts in your head drive your behaviors drive your actions, and your actions drive your outcomes. It's a very normal kind of linkage out there in behavioral science. The thing is, they don't get into actually is what drives your thoughts. Interesting thought there. We go into a lot of the science piece. It doesn't feel heavy in the course, but the thing we're trying to tell you is that, guess what? You're locked down in the military environment right now. You spent a lot of time there. Even if you've spent only 5 years, the plethora of your long-term memory are essentially anchoring you in this environment, right? Now, again, that's great when you're serving the military environment. When you're talking about a completely different private sector environment, you're going to try to pull that thinking and decision making over into the private sector, and sometimes that's problematic. Does anybody I can give several examples of this, but does anybody kind of have a comment or question on that? Let me give an example. Okay, so in the workplace, like I had kind of explained maybe just a little bit before, every person coming out of the military is a generalist, neurologically, meaning you always did what the mission required you to do. Even though you had an AFSC, MOS, whatever, or primary and secondary, you did what the unit needed, and you've become used to that, meaning I will do whatever it takes. So what happens with that in the private sector is something we call role creep. And even if you were hired into a business development position, a strategy position, marketing position, product line, you are a generalist, and unless you've been taught otherwise, you might want to try to help your coworkers out. And that might not be welcome in that new environment because, again, they're positioned in a way where everyone's a subject matter expert in their domain. And they do create cross collaborative activities, but they're intentionally designed in. You're supposed to be very deep on your task and do your task, and then you can work with others otherwise. But like I've noticed after designing these models with friends of mine when I was working in Collins Aerospace, he was a strategist like me, but he was constantly helping BD and he was constantly helping the scholarship people. And like, to be honest, it was, it created a little bit of team strife where he was kind of put out on an island. And, in the private sector, they just kind of put you out on an island, right? They just kind of leave you out there and don't talk to you and aren't quite sure what to do. And it just becomes, again, an unknown problem. Let me give one more example. I don't remember who made the comment, but the mission comes first, the mission comes first, the mission comes first. In the military, we talk about General Patton's quote of, hey, I'd rather violently execute a mission now than wait 2 weeks and have a better plan. Guess what? The private sector is 180 out from that. When you talk about the private sector environment, unless you're trained on it, you could be frustrated when you get into this new environment because you think their decisions are too slow. It takes too much collaboration. There's too many decision makers. There's all these different things. So what I'm saying is just understanding that you're moving to a new environment in this new context that you got to go into. If you already understand that, it makes it so much easier to fit into this and understand how other people are behaving, why they're behaving, and then know how to fit in and not stress as much and put in less effort and be a better employee. Like I'll give you one other kind of anecdote. As we're doing this with Melissa, Missy was a F-15 pilot that went through our training. And she's like, oh my God, this is so helpful because I don't have to do everybody's job anymore. She's like, all I have to do is my job. And I'm like, yeah, like that's strongly encouraged. Just do your job. You don't have to think of for the organization. You don't have to do your job. And it relieves tons of cognitive load because even though you're neurologically set up, which means you're going to really fight the impulse to try to help everyone out, you only need to do your job. Okay, week 3. Okay, so private sector orientation. So like we had spoken about in week 2, where we talk about your long-term memory is really rooted in the military. Understandably, you spend a lot of time there, you think and make decisions there. The environment's super unique. The private sector is super different, so we need to orient you to that. So let me go through some basic orientation here. And again, we cover this in more detail, but this gives you the highlights. The way we explain it, going way back in the slide deck, is, you got existence, competition, need to make revenue, actually makes the private sector rather unstable, right? When compared to the military environment. So the private sector survives with 3 major things that help you understand it quicker once you understand them. 1, revenue generation, right? That is the absolute primary thing, because if you don't have money, you don't have a company. That's it. So you can kind of see we're stabilizing the Jenga tower here with revenue generation. And we go into more detail of programs make money, programs make money, programs make money. That was driven into me by leaders at Collins. The next is organizational structure at the bottom here, right? So how they organize themselves. And I've already kind of alluded to it, but we talk about specific roles and levels. So you need to know what role you want to go into. And because we're generalists coming out of the military, a lot of us don't even know what roles are available. I know that sounds crazy, but you don't know what roles they are because you don't know how it's organized because it's so different. And then business processes. Holy smokes. Okay. When you talk about making money, there's gate processes, strategic financial plans, AOPs. You're going to be doing stuff. And unlike me, it took me 5 years to kind of get oriented in the private sector. Once we teach you how you're going to interact with your coworkers and why you're doing it, probably as part of a business process, whether it's a gate review or something else, you just understand how you fit into the organization. It just makes sense, Okay, so I'm going to kind of harp on this again, just to kind of bring it up. Service members, inch deep and mile wide. 100%, every one of us, right? Inch wide, mile deep, totally different proposition. That is what you and everyone else leaving the military has to figure out if you go into the private sector, which the numbers say 70% go into the private sector, medium to large size companies, most people go in there, which means you need to move from being a generalist to a specialist. And that is the transformation, literally, we got to help walk you through. Any questions, comments on that? And then I'm almost done here. Okay, I'll press. So next, your role in the revenue engine. We're going to teach you about headcount. Headcount is the full number of full part-time employees, because once they do that, they can negotiate health benefits, they can negotiate insurance and all these different things. Within headcount are roles. Now, this is a complicated chart, but what we're going to show you is start introducing you to industry segments and roles so that you could start aligning with what roles are out there that might be a good fit for you. And when we talk about a profit, we're going to help you contextualize what roles are and what they do, because we always tie them to the profit-making entity, which is the program, right? Again, lots of words here, but if you understand how the company makes money and how your role aids the profit-making enterprise, you are going to be so much better off, whether you're a W-2, 1099, or whether you're doing something else as a consultancy. Again, complicated chart, just giving you a little heads up. Then last part here, the EPC, Employment Prep Course, weeks 4 and 5 are where we do your set your post-military career direction. So here's what I mean by that. In your last week here, what we have you do is we have you set a vector. When we talk about setting a vector, we have a tool here where what we want you to do is begin exploring. We're going to kind of inculcate this in your mind. Location, industry, company, role. Location, industry, company, role. And when you start thinking like that, you're going to start programming in where you want to live, because that drives what industry is in the area. And you're going to use AI tools to figure out what industries are there, what companies serve those industries. The next thing we're going to have you do, again, choose your industry. And we've got the list of the list of industries that are out there. Then we're going to have you pick a company, and then we're going to have you pick a role. And this role is tied to the different role charts that we just showed you on there. So it's all enclosed within the system. And then you're going to tell us what your confidence is for this particular vector. And then once you fill out this form, it sends you an email. So it does exactly, you're going to be familiar with these tools because you went through week 1 with your tech stack, but this is building upon that, where it sends you an email, tells you how to use LinkedIn to find that right person, that right role that's in that company that you want to talk to. It sets up that meeting for them. It has you do that informational meeting, collect information. Once you start doing that, what we call it is, when we talk about anchoring, you set an anchor in the private sector, start building memory around it. And as you continue building that footprint within the private sector, you now have dueling identities between the military and the private sector. So that's where the real magic kind of happens in the course. So I think that 45 minutes, Thad. It's a lot of information, guys. My apologies for it being like,
I think you shacked it. That was great. That was fantastic.
Hey, Jason.
Good.
Go ahead, man.
I was just going to say, I know, is there a way to link your military experience to help align it? Now, I understand what you say, that we're all generalists, and I definitely agree with that, but, you could be more of a, expertise more in logistics, or you could be in healthcare administration, or, trigger puller or something. But if you just kind of say what your MOS is or your specialty, is there something that kind of helps at least point you a little bit in a particular direction?
So it's a good question. So what I could tell you is, statistically, 25% want to do something completely different, or they claim they want to do something different. What we recommend is this employment vector method that you're looking at right now. You go experiment. And again, these experimentations initially take a little bit of time, but after a while, like when you get proficiency in the muscle development, this is like breathing for you. And this is this new professional development competency we're talking about you develop, because now I'll go through my Google alerts. I'll find something that's interesting. I'll find that person on LinkedIn, I'll set up a meeting, I'll learn something. And it's automatic now. It just becomes a new competency. So I guess what I'm saying, Don, is you could do that, but we leave that to the individual. That is, hey, do you want to try something in your career first? Do you want to have an ABC plan where you're kind of doing 3 different lines of action? Do you want to stick with one? No matter what you're doing, as soon as you start reaching out and putting a hook down and memory around that in the private sector, really good things start happening. So that's all we're trying to do, is get you in the habit of doing that. Is that, hopefully that answered the question? Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Jason, Marty here. Great presentation as always. Hey, I was wondering, can you talk a little bit about some of the feedback you got from some of the students who've gone through your program,
Yep.
and see if I don't know how you make the comparison between like TAP and your program, if you can do that, like like you have a if experiment to it and all. But what's your sense about the folks that go through your program and their success rate versus those that don't?
So, great question. I'm trying to pull this up, but I'm not going to have time to do it. So, in our last cohort, we had 30 people. We had, even though it was a 99% virtual cohort, we had 92% completion rate. Just so you know that. And then of the I guess 92, so that's gonna be 24 plus people. We get testimonials coming from the members that do it. So just to give you a rough idea, and Rich doesn't mind that I do this. Here you go. EPC gives service member the essential literacy and mindset shift that TAP can't, and every commander wants their people to have that. Just as an example, right? PreVeteran was the first slap across the face. He's a Marine. The reality check I needed. I'm confident now. Control will keep growing, but I finally understand the environment and tools to operate in it. We just talked about that. These are just from the last few days, by the way. Okay, so this is, let me see who this is. So this is James. So he's a Air Force Academy Department of Computer Science guy. And what he said, when we talk about this, here you go. TAP is good. It has a purpose, but its employment part was focused on getting resumes through AI systems. They use Translate your skills a ton. I was worried about overselling myself. The course goes the other way. It's just about finding people already in the industry and understanding the business. It's about talking to a person, not just dealing with, and obviously he's big on the resume stuff, but, and then Steph, and again, this is just from the last cohort. TAP was a peek into what I didn't know. PreVeteran is what helped me close the gaps. The course recalibrated me to the private sector mindset. So like it works really well is kind of our point. And like, we know everyone here, everyone in the military wants to be successful. Unfortunately, our claim is you've been set up to believe that the environments are conflated. They're not. Once you understand that, and you understand that's the challenge you got to overcome, and then you're given the tools to do so, you gain autonomy, like the kumbaya, right? So I hope that answered your questions, Marty.
No, it totally does, because it kind of leads to why we're excited about partnering with y'all. Because we've got some folks that are signed up. They're looking at doing the cohort coming up, and I think getting their feedback, relative to what they've gone through in GeoTap is going to be really, I think, going to be really exciting to understand that and see what we can do going forward with for our members. Because that's what we're finding. A lot of the folks join TFGON. It's the transition piece, networking, getting to know some folks, remake acquaintances, make new acquaintances, the job board, those kinds of things. So we hope this is going to be just another element to that.
That's great. I want to bring up one other thing, Marty. Thanks for bringing it up. We had a general officer in our last cohort, and it was great. So she is a guard 1-star getting ready to pin on 2-star, and she's like, this is perfect for general officers too. She said that. So I wish I would have pulled up that quote, but like, we believe, again, everybody else is like, everyone needs a different TAP. Nope. Everybody needs the same thing. It's just hasn't been framed properly. And the fact that you can kind of go through it on your own and you get your tools and start using them is like universally just, we're very excited about, obviously partnering with you as well.
Hey, Jason, I'm sure your course has changed quite a bit since 2020. I'm kind of curious, what changes do you see in the future? Or, if you could add one more week, what things would you add or subtract? How do you see it changing, or is it pretty tight and you're pretty happy with where you're at?
So it's a great question. Has it fundamentally changed since 2020? Actually, no. It's
Okay.
weird. Like I'm an intuitive kind of founder, and I was like, because something like this doesn't really exist. I mean, all the other stuff is like coaching, and it's 11 to 14 weeks, and very mission statement oriented. We're like, nope, it's training. You got gaps, let's fill them. But we have improved it, and we're getting ready to do a full rebuff of it, just because everything is tightened up after our last revamp was 2023. But now that we're adding in AI tools and stuff like that, there are some things that are added in that we want to kind of make less federated, let's put it that way. And then in our next build next summer, I mean, it's going to be really slick because we want to scale, right? I mean, we could have, believe it or not, thousands in our cohort and support that no problem. That's kind of our business goal moving forward is, we could still provide a very high touch feel to it, but be able to do it with lots of people in there. And we think that's going to work moving forward with just larger numbers.
Do you find, a big difference in, for folks that are going to, a startup, or folks that are going to DoD Prime, folks that are going to academia? I have one friend that's, opening a brewery as he retires and going to be a real brick and mortar business owner. Do you feel like that you're able to cover down on kind of all those scenarios, or do you feel like it's more focused on one or another?
No, because it's more like private sector orientation. Again, once everybody understands that they're two environments, they're kind of lacking the familiarity in one. That opens up just a completely new world because no matter what you're going to pursue, it's in that new environment. It's non-military for sure. Even as a prime or a DoD guy like I was, it's still a private sector organization. Totally functions differently, even though the customer is the military. So what we have found is once we expose them to this new environment, they feel so much more comfortable in it. Then their options do open, and they're real options. They're not, because service members, we're really good at thinking and we run plans in our mind. And, we got to make sure those plans are really grounded in reality and grounded in like real interactions with real people in those real companies and real roles, or if they are interested in that small business. But familiarity is always good because, again, everyone's very intelligent. It's just right now they're unaware of the challenge and then not familiar at all with the new environment they're going into.
No, that's great. Well, Jason, we're coming up on our hour. I'll throw it out for one more question if anybody has one. I don't want to cut anybody off. If nothing's
Hey,
heard,
Jason, sorry,
go ahead, Don.
I missed the first couple of minutes. You said 99% virtual. What happened to the other 1%?
Great question. So we have a meetup once a week on Thursday nights, 6 to 7 Mountain Time. We get about 60 to 70% of the cohort that kind of shows up because they just want to kind of meet, hang out, get to know who's in the cohort. But it's not required because some people are deployed, some people are in Europe, some are in Asia. So we record it like you guys are doing now, and we put it in the LMS so people could watch it later. But that's why it's like 99%.
Oh, okay. So it's still virtual,
Yep.
but that one's synchronous as opposed to everything else is asynchronous.
Correct. Exactly. You got it.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
that only live part that is a single meeting is that one Thursday night. Other than that is do it on your own during that week. And I did want to mention, Marty, if you wouldn't mind passing along my information, if there are people that are listening, we'd love to have you in the cohort that's coming up. It starts the 19th of January. So it'd be great to have them.
Yeah, we'll do. We'll do.
Yeah. And Jason, fantastic. Thank you for your time today. For those that may have joined late, we already have, I think, 6 in the course in January out of TFGON. Marty said he had another 5 or 6 that emailed or called today. So we appreciate you giving us some free slots into the course, and we'll try it out for a number of GOs and give you some feedback. But very generous of you, and appreciate what you're doing for our veterans overall. I think this is fantastic, and I just really appreciate the opportunity. So with that, we'll wrap it up and see everybody next month. But thanks again, Jason, for what you're doing. We look forward to staying in contact.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it, everybody. Thanks for letting me join. See ya.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason. Hey, Jason. Hey, I